Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Protopilot. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to build an infinite scroll component right inside of ProtoPie. So let's have a look at the finished article. So I've got my completed infinite scroll pie file here. So let me just bring over the preview window. So I've got these three components, and I've obviously been playing with. So this is the beginning of the list. So I'm just going to scroll, and I can carry on scrolling forever, and it's just going to continue to scroll. And you can see that the three cards are just repeating sequentially. I'm not doing anything particularly clever with the content in this particular prototype. It's just cycling through the three cards. Okay, so that's what we're going to build in this episode. So let me just close this file down. And before we get into the actual building part of it, we need to go through the logic. So basically the solution of how we're going to build this thing. So if we have a look at this diagram, so I've got my mobile screen over here on the left hand side, and you can see here I'm essentially saying that this blue rectangle is my viewable area. So that's the area within which I'm going to see my cards scroll. And over here we've got effectively what's going to happen. So as you can see, I'm going to start scrolling, and initially I'm going to see card 1, and I'm going to see most of card 2. Card 3 is outside of the viewable screen. So I'm going to start scrolling downwards, which is going to move my scrolls upwards. And effectively, we're going to come to stage 2, where I would have scrolled completely card 1 off screen. So now I can see card 2 and card 3, but card 1 is completely off screen. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to recognize when card 1 is completely off screen, and we're going to actually put it to the bottom of the list. So you can see in this third column here, my card 1 has now been moved to the bottom of the list, and you can still see I've got card 2 and card 3 in view. If we continue and play this through, I'm going to continue scrolling. And as I scroll, card 1 is now going to come into view, and now card 2 is going to be completely off screen and completely outside of the viewable screen. And the whole cycle will start all over again. Card 2 will be moved to the bottom of the screen, and then card 3 will be moved to the bottom of the screen when it goes off screen. And that will just continue going on and on and on as I continue to scroll. So this is effectively the logic behind how we're going to make that infinite scroll work. We're going to detect when the card is off screen, and we're going to move it to somewhere else in the list. Okay, so that's the logic, that's the theory behind how this is going to work. And it's really important that when you're trying to solve complex problems, that you really think about them outside of ProtoPie, and on a pad or on a whiteboard. Just think about the logic of what you're trying to do. Now, sometimes the way you're going to achieve it in ProtoPie isn't going to be necessarily the way you would achieve it in real code, for example. So you've got the flexibility and the freedom to hack the idea, to use smoke and mirrors to make it look like what you want it to look like. So you can really explore different ideas around how you can achieve what you need to achieve. But do try and plan it out up front. Really think about where things are moving, especially for this particular UI component. It was really important for me to be able to see it visually. It was actually hard to think about all of the maths and all of the numbers just completely in my head. I needed to get it out onto a page. I'm a very visual person. We're all designers, we're all very visual people. And it's a lot easier to figure out exactly where things need to go if you can see it all visually in one page. So, okay, so that's a bit of a hint and a bit of a tip about how you should go about approaching solving these complex problems. Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you are, maybe you'll consider subscribing to the channel. That way you'll get notified when I drop new content onto the channel, and you'll also be helping getting the Protopilot name out there to the masses. Okay, back to the video. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to our first scene, our scene 1. I'm just going to make this bigger. Not that big though. Okay, so this is our basic setup. We've got a single screen, and over here I've got effectively a container called view. That's got my whole screen inside of it. And inside of this view container, I've got a header container and I've got a list container. And the list container currently holds 3 components. So these card components are just some components that I've created for my own work, for the work, for the video tutorials that I do on Protopilot. Sometimes it's just quicker to use components to get the kind of examples together. And these are just pretty standard components as far as Protopie is concerned. They haven't got any particular logic inside of them. I can just override them as I would any other standard component, just with the text overrides and such. Okay, so nothing special going on in there. But effectively, I've got 3 instances of my card component, and they're called card 1, card 2, and card 3. They're sitting inside this list container. If we go over to the details panel, we can see the list container has just been set to a scroll view, and it's just a vertical scroll. So it's effectively just a pretty standard vertical scroll container inside of Protopie. Okay, so this is my basic setup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn our list into a component. So you can right click it, choose convert to component, or you can just select it and hit this component button here. If I just do that, and now instantly I've got a component made out of my list container. And if we come over to the components panel, let's just hide some of this stuff up here. You can see, actually, let's just get rid of that. No, that's fine. So you can see I've got my list component here in my local components, and you can also see that card component that I'd already had created. Okay, so we've created our component. We now want to go into the component and start editing it, because I want this to be a component. I want to be able to drag and drop it into any project and just have this list all ready to go. So that's the aim. Okay, so we're going to double click, go into this list component. Okay, so we're now inside of the component. You can tell that because the top level container is now this teal color. We can just twizzle down and you can see that I've got my same structure as I had before. What was the container is now the top level roots of the component, and I've got my 3 cards sitting inside. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to come over to our triggers panel. So just open this out. I'm just going to change the background of this from white to something a bit easier on the eye. That's a bit better, a bit easier to work with. And I'm going to add my first trigger, and that's going to be a detect. Okay. And with the detect selected, I need to select a target, what I want to detect. I want to detect the list, and I want to detect the list's scroll property. So I want to detect when the list is scrolling up and down. Okay. And what I'm going to do underneath that is I'm going to start to add a whole bunch of conditions. There's going to be a lot of repetitive work in this particular video. Which is a good and a bad thing. It's good in the sense that once I've taken you through the first version of all the things you need to do, most of it is just going to be duplicating and changing a few values. But obviously we have to go through and do this repetitive work. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do under this detect, we're going to add a condition. And we're going to call this condition cryptically greater arrow 1. Okay, so greater arrow means it's a particular condition which is going to control scrolling down the page. So effectively the list item is going up and you are scrolling down. So we're going to use that as our title. And within our condition, we just want to make sure that we've got the list as our target, which is cool. And within this, we also want to choose the scroll property. Okay, so we've got our list as the target. We want to have this condition around the scroll property. And now we need to choose one of these operators. So these are called operators. So you've got greater, greater and equal to, lesser, lesser and equal to and not equal to. And in fact, as you can see, as I was hovering over those, you get little tooltips in case you get stuck. Okay, so we're going to choose greater or equal to this guy here. And the next thing we want to do is we want to add a formula. So where it says 1a value, we're just going to select that and we're going to choose fx formula. And before we go any further, we actually need a variable to make this work. So we're going to come over to our variables panel here and we're going to hit plus. We're going to create our first variable and we're just going to call this variable scroll pos. I'm all about the abbreviations. And by default, our variable is going to be a number variable and we can leave the default value at 0. That's absolutely fine. Okay, coming back to our condition, we're going to come back into our formula and we're going to click in it and we're going to tap the FX button here. Excuse me. And that's going to take us into this formula mode so we can actually start typing some formulas. And the first thing we want to access is the variable we've just created, the scroll position variable. So we're going to start typing. In fact, I've made a typo there. That should be 2 L's. Okay, coming back here. So we're going to start typing, and as soon as we start typing, we're going to get this lookup. So Protopie is looking for all of the objects within formulas that match what we're typing. So we can see our variable is at the top of the list here. So we're just going to select it. Okay. Next, we want to type plus because we're effectively. I'll go through what the formula means as we finish it. So bear with me on this. Just kind of type what I'm typing. So we're going to type a plus because we want to add some values together. And this next bit is we want to choose one of our cards. We actually want to choose card 1. So the way you do this, there's a couple of ways you can do it. I can just hit the add button here. That's one way, and then I can choose my card from the list. The other way is if you find the tick marks on your keyboard, and they're either normally in the top left-hand corner or somewhere down by the shift key. On my keyboard, they're down here by the shift key, and you can just tap that, and you also will. It's just a little shortcut to get you to the same list, and I can then choose my card 1 here, and you can see it's got these little tick marks. That's these little backward pointing little things, and you can see the whole thing's in this solid green, which means it's correct. It's actually matched. So if you ever get any issues with things not working correctly, just make sure you've got tick marks around layer names, because that you need to have those tick marks around layer names for it to all work correctly. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to type a dot, and typing a dot or a period will give us access to all of the properties that Protopie gives us access to within layers. So there's a whole bunch of properties you have access to here, which you're probably familiar with some of them from some previous work you've done. We actually want the height property. So we're just going to choose height, card1.height, and we're going to click OK. Okay, so this effectively completes our formula, and what we're effectively doing here is we're grabbing the value inside the scroll position variable, which by default has started at 0. And we're going to add the height of card 1. And what this is effectively is telling us within this condition is that when the list scrolls, if the value of the list is greater or equal than the number that gets generated by this formula, we're going to do some stuff. Okay, and the stuff is going to be the responses that we're going to be adding inside of our condition block. Okay, so just to go back to our little diagram here, so all that formula is doing, just to be absolutely clear, is it's recognizing when our card gets into this position. When our card 1 comes out of the scroll view and it gets into this position, that's going to be the trigger point for our first condition. Okay, so let's go back to scene 1. Actually, we're going to go into our component and we can carry on. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create another variable. And this one's going to be called selected. This is also going to be a number variable. For this number variable, we're going to actually select its initial number to 1 because we know we're going to be starting with card number 1, so we're just going to set that as our default value. Okay, so we're going to come back to condition 1 here. And within conditions, you can actually set multiple, I call them sub-conditions. They're just called condition 1, condition 2. But you can create conditions in the trigger panel, but you can also create multiple conditions within a single condition. So at the moment, we've got one condition, which is basically saying if the scroll of the list is greater or equal to this value, execute whatever the responses are. But we also want to add another condition. So we can hit the plus button there. And we're going to add this second subcondition. And the second subcondition is going to use this selected variable that we've just created. So we're just going to choose that from the list. And this time we're going to leave the operator at equals because we want to just check if this variable equals a certain value. And the value we're looking for is 1. Okay. So let's just read through condition 2. So if selected equals 1, do stuff inside. So because we've put these two subconditions into the same condition block, this means that both of these conditions need to be true for any responses within this block to run. So if we read through the whole condition, we're essentially saying if the scroll of the list is greater or equal to the value that's created by this formula here, and the value of the selected variable is equal to 1, then do the stuff inside this block. Okay. Okay. So we've now set up our trigger and we set up our first condition, excuse me. Now we're going to move on to the responses. Okay, so the first response that we want to add is a move response. And we're going to select this move response and we're going to choose card 1. So we want to move card 1 and we want to move it to a particular position. So because we're essentially creating a scrolling list, we're only working on the y-axis. We just want to change the y value. So we're going to put a formula in here. So we're going to open up our formulas panel. And we're going to start typing this formula. So we're going to access another layer. So we're going to access, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to access card 3. And I'm going to type a dot to access card 3's properties. And I want to get card 3's y property. Okay, so we want to move it to card 3's y property. And then we're going to add a plus operator. And we're going to add another value to it. And this time we're going to add card 3's, choose that here, height property. And then finally, we're going to add another plus operator and we're going to type a hard value 16. Okay, so what are we doing here? Let's go through it. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to move card 1 to a particular point on the list. So rather than trying to figure out the actual value, we're just going to use formulas to help calculate the value for us. So the first part of the value that we need to get to move card 1 underneath card 3, if you remember, if we go back to our little diagram, we need to move card 1 here. So it's got to be below card 3. So that's where we need to move it to. So let's go back to our component and go back to our move response. Let's come back into this. So our starting point is card 3's Y position. But card 3's Y position starts at the top of the card. So the origin point of all objects in ProtoPie is the top left-hand corner. So that's going to give us the position of the top left-hand corner. But we need to put our card 1 under card 3. So to do that, we're going to add card 3's height to its position. So now we've got a different value. We've got the Y value plus the height will give us a value further down the screen. But that's still not enough, because we've actually got, you can see here, we've got a gutter between our cards, and that gutter is 16, funnily enough. So to that value, finally, we need to add the value 16 to get our card in the correct position. So this whole formula is just basically generating the position of where we're going to move our card number 1 once it's been scrolled off screen. Okay, so let's click OK on that. One thing we also need to do is we need to reduce the duration to 0. If you leave your default durations of 0.2 on these cards, you're going to get some very crazy animation going on. So just make sure that that duration is set to 0. Okay, so this completes all the things that we need to do on this move response. So we're going to move on to our next response. And our next response is going to be assign. And in fact, I'm just going to name this move card 1. And this is just a really good habit to get into, naming your responses. You've probably got some Pi files where it just says move, 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 assign, assign, opacity, 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 opacity. And that's great when you're working at speed, but it's going to be really hard to read when you come back to it. So it's a really good idea is just to spend a little time as you're going along, making sure you name these responses so you can easily glance at them and see what they are. Okay, so coming back to our assign response, we're going to assign. So assign is basically a response which allows you to assign values to variables. So we're going to choose our scroll pos variable, and we want to assign a value to it. And the value we're going to assign is we want to add this value to the existing value. So the first thing we need to do is just call our scroll pos variable itself. So effectively we're saying take the initial value or whatever value is in that variable as our starting point. And we're going to add a plus operator. And what we want to add to it is a layer's height. So this is the point where it doesn't really matter what layer you choose because all the layers are the same height. And you could even put a hard number in here if you really wanted to. I'm going to, because I'm lazy, I'm going to just grab the height of card 3, card 3.height. And the benefit of doing it this way is if I go back and I actually change the height of these cards, my formulas is going to, because it's referencing the height from the layer and not a hard value, it's going to update automatically. And this is really good for flexibility and reusability. Okay, and then finally I need to just add the 16 gutter to it. Okay, so we're going to add this value into our scroll position variable. Okay, I'm going to click OK. Okay, so let's move on. We've got one final response to add here, and that's another assign. And in this assign, we're going to choose our selected variable. This is going to be a really easy one. The formula here is going to be 2. So we're just going to increment the selected variable. And just to, I don't think I really explained what the selected variable was for. So the selected variable is going to have the number in it which refers to the card that we've currently got, that we're currently working with. So as we scroll up, we want to move cards. So we just want to make sure we know what card we're moving. And obviously, because we're using this selected condition, because we need to know what card we're moving, that's how we're doing it. That's how we're effectively having a unique identifier for the card we're working with. So that's the whole point of the selected variable. Okay, so now we've dealt with moving card number 1. We want to increment that selected variable to number 2. So that's what that is all about. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the first condition. And we're going to be doing a lot of duplicating of this condition block, but this effectively is, I was going to say, this is as easy as it is. There's a few pieces of maths within it to make it all work, but hopefully as we go through and build it, you'll see it all coming together.